The War for Banks Island by John Green. Written for the 2011 Project for Awesome. This story is dedicated to the very patient philanthropist who donated to the Project for Awesome in exchange for this belated sequel. This story is not made of awesome, but you are. Chapter 1. On the morning of the elections, I woke up early so I could beat the line at the polling station and get to the lab by 8. I wanted to spend some quality time with my zombie before class started, and of course, to actually vote. You have to walk through the gauntlet of people handing you flyers and encouraging you to vote for this party or that party, and it all just became cacophonous and unpleasant, and I wanted to say to them, do you seriously think I've made it 12 paces of my polling station without making up my mind? This was compounded by the fact that I was generally nervous, having never voted before, and also that was, as we say on Banks Island, balls ass cold. And it reminded me of a phrase I'd read in a novel once. A novel set in Alabama. It referred to blistering heat, and sometimes when it was very cold outside, i.e., usually, I would conjure the images in the hopes that imagining the kind of heat that could blister skin would somehow warm me. There is some medical research that this actually works, by the way. I've since learned that in military survival training, they train you to imagine a crackling fire as you try to stay warm enough to build an actual fire, because the thoughts can actually constrict your blood vessels for a few minutes at least, stave off hypothermia. So anyway, I walked with purpose past all the campaign volunteers, and I was nearly to the door of my former elementary school when I heard someone repeating, "Caroline, Caroline, Caroline!" I looked up. It was my next door neighbor, Marcus McIntyre. "Hey, Mr. McIntyre," I said. "Caroline, will you read this before you cast your vote today?" He pressed a flyer into my hand. "It's time, Caroline. It's time for us." By us, I assumed he meant the Immies to be granted the vote. We were mostly American, but some Mexicans, and a spattering of Central and South Americans, who'd fought all the way to the banks. "Of course," I said, because my own mom was an Immy. "Just read it," he said. I nodded. "I hope you're doing okay," I said. He was a widow, and he'd lost his son, James, on the mainland a few months before. I didn't know the story, if it was Z's or a logging accident or what. But anyway, he was dead, and he'd only been like 23, and I hadn't seen much of Mr. McIntyre since. Sometimes you have to wonder if there's a point to living without a family. My mother had done it, but I think it hollowed out something inside of her. The truth is, Immies were different. Not because they weren't Canadian, but because by and large, they'd come from further away, making treacherous journeys without families, propelled towards the rotating cast of fellow orphans, a caravan in which everyone had lost everything, on the cold and Z-stock journey to the banks more than 2 decades ago. I took the flyer and walked inside. It was just a log cabin, really, built by the first AZ settlers, but it still felt big to me, although not as infinitely large as it had when I was a kid. The ceilings were just so high, the rooms so much bigger than those of any apartment I'd ever seen. Big indoor spaces are hard to heat, but when they'd built this first school, no one had known that we'd be here forever. I read the flyer while standing in line to show my ID. "Friends and neighbors, my name is Marcus McIntyre. I am an Immy, born in Texas, and I fought my way north as a young man in the first months of AZ, losing my family and everything else that mattered to me along the way, until the great nation of Canada welcomed me in as a refugee, and then I was lucky enough to make my way to the banks in April of 2 AZ. I helped build this school with men and women like Mia Carpenter and Leroy Jenkins. I helped build the apartments too, and when the heavy machinery came, I worked for 20 years as a foreman, building spaces where we could be safe. I married. We had a son, James. I always wished to vote for representatives in the land that I helped build, but I also understood that I am not Canadian, and that the people of Canada were generous and kind to accept me and other Immies. My wife died in the 15 AZ flu, and then it was just James and me. My son James was privileged to vote twice in the parliamentary elections before he died on the frontier last April, 24 years and 2 days after my arrival on the Banks Island. I will tell you what the government did not. He was attacked by a Z in his tent one night, heroically confessed his injury to his boss the next morning, and was summarily shot and killed by his best friend. He was a hero of our nation and of our species. Having given a Canadian son to this great struggle, just as many Immies have, is it not time for our voices to be heard? Am I not Canadian? Yours truly, Marcus McIntyre. My brother had lived and worked in the foraging crew on the mainland for 5 years. I had no idea there were Z's in the far north of the mainland. Or maybe James had gone further south. In my brother's letters, he'd always tell me that he could damn near see Banks from their camp at the waterfront, so he was very far north. I told myself not to worry. The voter registration volunteers took my ID and my fingerprint, and I was ushered into the voting booth. I voted for the IMI party, of course. For one thing, my mom was our parliamentary candidate. I couldn't very well not vote for my own mom. I knew she'd lose, of course. The IMI party, the Democratic Union, never won more than 20% of the vote, even though 55% of the islanders were Immies. But with more of us kids who'd been born on the banks coming of age each year, we got closer and closer to a government that would allow Immies the vote. It was mostly a symbolic thing, but I did want my mom to vote just once. It'd mean a lot to her. Then I walked a frigid half mile to the lab, walking backwards to shelter my face from the blistering north wind.